I think we're live. I
Yeah,
think
we are. Yeah, I see people showing up.
they caught the tail end of our small talk.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just do it then. Hey everyone, it's Brian Beutler. I'm editor and publisher of Off Message. I'm here with Jonathan D. Last, or JVL, as I think friends know him of the Bulwark. And I wanted to connect with JVL for a few reasons, I guess. One, because as I was telling him in the green room a minute ago, just a couple times a week, basically every week, I'll be listening to him make some like unnerving point about the death of American democracy or whatever on one of his Bulwark podcasts. And I'll be saying to myself, like, I agree, but, or I agree but then I remember that I'm just like, I'm only listening and he can't hear me talking to myself while he's on his
Not
podcast.
yet. Not yet. I can't. Once I get the Elon Musk chip, then I'll be able to tell.
And then, so I like fished around for a pretext for us to do one of these. And then he wrote a piece last week. I want to like keep the floor open in case you want to veer off in another direction, but wanted to talk to you about a piece you wrote this last week about rebuilding liberal democracy after inheriting whatever it is we stand to inherit from the people who are currently wrecking it. And maybe it just makes sense for you to like give people coming from my corner of Substack a summary of what inspired you to write your piece and the sort of model you described of why you worry the system can't be recovered. Because as I read it, I found myself simultaneously like more pessimistic than you, but also less so. And I wanted to tease out.
Well, I'm going to need a little more from you because I feel like I've written that piece 10 times in the last 2 weeks because the last 2 weeks have been really bad.
Is it simple systems, complex systems?
Oh, simple, complex systems. Yeah.
And
okay.
And it's possible that this has just been ripped asunder so badly that putting something coherent back together might not actually work.
So, are you a sci-fi nerd?
Not really, no.
But
I try to keep up with like highbrow sci-fi illusions so I can sound smart to people who are sci-fi nerds.
So, it's a fantastic book series called The Expanse. It got turned into an Amazon series. I did not watch it. I'm more of a super hard, like I like hard science fiction where they devote like 3 or 4 pages to math problems. That's what gets me going. Oh, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I would like that because I come from a hard science background, and like when science fiction actually has verisimilitude, I kind of like it more than when it's just laser beams out of eyes or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, in The Expanse, there is a subplot talking about how simple, complex systems are prone to failure, right? And so there are essentially 3 types of systems. There are simple systems, complicated systems, complex systems. But then within the world of complex systems, there's simple, complex, and like complex. And nature is complex. Nature just has pathways everywhere, and systems tend to be incredibly robust because nature is full of catastrophic events. Man-made complex systems are less robust because you can only make so many pathways, right? Man-made systems can only have so many adaptive pathways. And that's really what democracy and liberalism is. And I sort of use democracy and liberalism interchangeably, even though I understand that they are different things. And when I say liberalism, I mean like the small L liberalism of like minority rights and rule of law, stuff like, real basic. I don't mean like progressivism or like the American political context. I mean like the societal context. Anyway, and what I was saying is I wonder if right now what you have Trump stressing liberalism and democracy, and you have a bunch of these compensatory pathways which are trying to manage those stresses. And they keep failing. Like Congress has failed. The legislature, which was there, has failed. The business community has basically failed. The legal world has partially failed, but partially held, right? So some of the courts have held, but not all of them. They've held in some places, not in others. You've seen like officers of the court doing dereliction of duty. It strikes me that we may not be at the tipping point where the whole system goes into terminal failure yet, but there probably is one. And once you hit that, like, I just don't know what goes next. Like how do you dig out from this? Do you dig out from this? What would you even, what would, if we just fast forwarded 4 years and
Yeah.
assume a ladder, right? Is the old economist joke, right? You're in a hole. First thing you do, well, you assume a ladder. So we'll just assume we have a ladder to get us out of this hole. Okay, well then what? Like, what is it? Just like, well, every 4 years you have to cross your fingers and hope that the authoritarian party doesn't come in and try to wreck democracy and move to competitive authoritarianism again? Or do you have to do a bunch of stuff which is going to look super radical? And this gets back. I'll stop talking in a minute. I
No, it's
promise.
fine. It's fine. It's fine.
This gets back to the heart of a debate that my partner Sarah Longwell and I had a lot in the early Biden years. So like the first 6 months of Biden, which was there were two pathways in front of him, and one was we're going to do a whole bunch of really radical shit to try to Trump-proof the system, and it's all going to be unpopular, and we're going to get yelled at for it, and a bunch of it will fail, but some of it will get through, and we'll try to protect America that way. Or, hey, we're just going to try to take down the temperature and fake it till we make it. This
Mhm.
is there's no way to Trump proof a system against authoritarianism. If the people want authoritarianism badly enough, eventually they will get it. So what we're going to try to do is lower the temperature and try to let the poison leach itself out of the body politic. And I think that was a very close call, a judgment call. I mean, I can make arguments for both pathways. Biden clearly chose the second, and he clearly failed. But that doesn't, again, I don't think that was foreordained
Yeah.
necessarily. And if you run it 10 times, maybe it fails every time, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. So anyway, I'll stop. You go.
No, yeah. So I agree that the time to really address this in a way where it did not seem like such a heavy lift was 4.5 years ago, and
Yeah.
choices were made that precluded that. I'm not sure I see it as quite as much as a fork in the road as you see it, where he could have picked doing we're going to build a bunch of bridges in Michigan, and then that's going to convert people back to the Democratic cause, and we're not going to foreground accountability. I think you could have done both. And actually, in some ways, I think that if you had a Biden administration charging hard at accountability, that would have freed Democrats in Congress to hide a little bit while they took the votes on all the stuff having to do with taxes and money. And maybe then you can get the best of both worlds, like a Trump-proofed system and a liberal democracy that has delivered for people, and then you can present that to the voters. Anyway, none of that happened, or the
Right.
bridges were enacted and then half built, and then Trump took back over. And I think I basically agree insofar as, you're talking about things like Congress, the courts, the legal system. And to the extent that the question is, can we just go back to where those things work as well or poorly as they did before in 2029? I think that ship has sailed. Where I think I'm maybe more optimistic than you about it all, is that if you imagine 3.5 years ahead and how much worse things will be then than they are now. So basically almost like rebuilding a liberal democracy from scratch. I think if you break that challenge down into its component parts, none of them is unheard of. It's a lot of stuff, and it's hard, and as you suggest, I think a lot of it would be politically unpopular, and things have to go right more often than not, right? Things can't keep failing as you're propping new things up, but it's not like reinventing the wheel. And for me, the main source of despair, or just the thing that makes it hard for me to remain engaged in kind of pro-democracy fighting, is that I see very few signs that the people who are most likely to inherit whatever it is, where is going to be left to them, they are not taking the initial steps towards saying and doing the things that you would want them to be doing, where you're okay, those guys realize that there's a big task ahead, and they're preparing to execute on what needs to be done. So if I was going to put meat on the bones, one component, and I know this is Sarah's thing, and she's totally right about it, is that Trump has to be more unpopular than he is, like significantly. Um, and that might happen to some extent on its own, but it's such an essential component that ideally I think you'd like to be seeing Democrats doing more affirmative things to try to drag him down, rather than just kind of stand back and hope he self-immolates like they've been hoping for the last 10 years. Um, but then if you manage to make Trump unpopular, you need was it a physicist or an economist? Will assume a unified government in 2029.
Right.
Whatever they said that, right? But then from there you can start building things. And here's where like it would differ in either in statutory terms or in constitutional terms or just even just in like norms bound terms from the government that Biden handed off to Trump. But like a purge of Trump loyalists and like no apologies for purging Trump loyalists, right? Like staffing up. So like bringing in new bureaucrats, giving them raises, like finding some people who have important knowledge that were pushed out of government, retain them, give them consulting money to help rebuild quickly, right? And then you need like procedurally, you need something to give all the stakeholders reason to trust that this will be more durable, right? And so that's like accountability for like people who weren't pardoned. Like if they broke the law, they need to be pursued. If they committed, professional violations that should challenge their ability to practice law or whatever, like those need to be pursued. And then you need like something like a reckoning, like a January 6th committee on steroids. That's like Truth and Reconciliation, where you just kind of air out what happened, right? Like, and like just like a total rejection of the idea that Republicans get to break things unconstrained, but the Democrats can only rebuild by playing by the old rules. And so it's like, it's like the post Watergate settlement times 100. But we've seen societies do each of these things before. Like we have done each of these things. We've seen societies backslide, democracies backslide, and then like reassert themselves. We've seen democracies arise from nothing. And so I don't feel like this is a hopeless situation if you can make it so that less than 44% or whatever it is of the public is on board with keeping this authoritarian like cell administration that we have. If you can get that below 40% or 35 and have the people in place with the right mindset and just willing to press ahead, I think that like you can get there. And it's not the people who are like poised to do that work are capable enough to do it. I just don't think that I think they're too scared.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be a smartass, but are there a lot of examples of democracies which backslid and then reasserted themselves?
Not a lot. No, I mean, I think Poland is kind of in the process, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like in the limbo. I mean, I like, the reading that I've done on this, like, it feels like a dimmer switch, sort of, where things get darker, but then they can get lighter, and like what has happened now is that things have gotten darker faster than I thought they would, but like the light hasn't gone out. And, like where we are is very dark, but there's a needle point of light at the end where if these steps are taken in a concerted way by people with like the courage of their conviction to follow through, then it's like, it's something that like, it would also obviously, I would feel better about waking up every day participating in that than I do watching the response to this from people who have power now.
Let me ask you two questions that are connected. The first is, what percentage of the country do you think wants what we have now? Not like, well, they don't really like it, but, inflation or blah, blah, blah. But what percentage of the country do you think looks around, not that they're not poorly informed, but like, it's like, yes, this is what I want?
I would guess it's north of 30, but not much, which I think puts it higher than is ideal. like I was listening to, I forget which one, whether it was Ziblatt or his co-author, whose name is escaping me at the moment, on How Democracies Die. And I think he was basically like 20 to 25% of every democracy is basically fascist. But depending on how the system is set up and contingent on it being at that kind of level, they will typically lose. Like they can charge and they can do frighteningly well in elections, but they have a hard time taking power. And here they've taken power because our system didn't have certain fail safes. And I think that's right. I think that like if George Bush could leave office at 28%, having crashed the economy and gotten us into a quagmire of a war, then Trump could leave office maybe a little less unpopular than that because he's got a more dedicated cult around him. But I think that like I forget what number Sarah likes to put it at, 32%, 35%.
32 is what Sarah likes.
Yeah.
So let me ask my follow-up question then. At what percentage of the population that wants this, does it stop mattering like how smart or how convicted or how well the good guys conduct themselves? Because I mean, I do, like how many Bolsheviks were needed to overthrow the czars? Like not that many. It was like 20,000 Bolsheviks, right? You don't need 50% of the country to wreck liberalism. Liberalism is only sustainable with like a really, really overwhelming consensus.
So big question. I mean, I'm not. Sometimes I think about the 2008 election and like, if we could have an election of that magnitude or similar, like I think a lot of progress could be made towards creating a more robust version of the liberal democracy that is currently collapsing. But that's because you could design it better, because you could entice people out of the sort of like Trumpish world to like, in the same way that people testified at the January 6th committee hearings against Trump from his own administration, he could leave behind a mess big enough that people are going to be like, look, this is what I saw. This is what needs to happen to prevent it from happening again. And so you can broaden the coalition and fine tune the rebuilding, even if the Democrat who takes office in 2029 or whenever only wins 54% of the vote or 53% of the vote, right? Like Barack Obama, was running against old John McCain, who liked war. The country was weary of war. The economy was in collapse. George W. Bush was at 28%. And, McCain still walked away with 45% of the vote, which is, you can look at that as bearish. And in a way it is, I think, like a bearish historical fact. But I think you can also look at it as couldn't we make a lot of progress if Democrats had the 2009 majorities again?
McCain was... No, I don't think you could. I mean, McCain was not running on totalitarianism, though. Like that's like the difference is that the parties have sorted out. So that, you said like 25% of every population probably has is fascist inclined. Something like that is broadly true. But I want to say is Eric McMillan is the name of the social scientist who just wrote a book about this, or didn't just, but wrote a book about this about 4 years ago. And the point he made was that what has happened in America post-Trump is that those people with fascist inclinations were broadly distributed across the political spectrum in the same way that like anti-vax sentiment and conspiracy theory adherence was basically sprinkled across the political spectrum. And that stuff has all been polarized now. And once... we'll just pretend it's 25%. Once that 25% is all together in a single home, that's unbelievably powerful.
It is. I mean, you can see that like, despite being smaller than the anti-Trump opposition, the pro-Trump movement is the strongest force in the U.S. And I think part of that has to do with how the pro-Trump movement or the pro-democracy movement assembles itself and conducts itself. Because the MAGA movement conducts itself with total confidence at all times, right? Like they project forward momentum and intimidation, and it gives them a sense of inevitability. And the pro-democracy movement is fractured and unsure of itself. And I think this is like an unattractive quality of it that prevents it from reaching maximum power, which at that, I think they're just, it's larger and might be able to just like tackle MAGA head on in ways where like you wouldn't see businesses like bending the knee because they'd be worried about what the pro-democracy contingent was going to do
Right.
on the other side of the next election. And so I take the point that if it's 30% of the country, you're in this permanent pickle kind of, right? Because you can't illegalize fascist coups, right? You could pass a
Right.
law, but if they decide we're just going to hold out to the next election and break the law all over again to break down the new thing that you built, you can't. There's very little you can do about that. But I do think that like you can create a quasi-stable system that that isn't just a 4 or 8 year thing. And then if it gets ripped down, if it never gets built up again or gets built up and then ripped down very quickly, that's probably just game over. Like nobody's ever going to believe that the United States of America can be a stable democracy if we go through this and don't come out of it with something that has decades of life ahead of it. But like I do think that if you have like Trump instituting this project, it fails in part on its own weight and in part because Democratic leaders in Congress and the next Democratic presidential nominee and people in the streets, expose all the contradictions within it and make its failures manifest so that he has 30% popularity when he leaves or whatever it happens to be. The next Democratic president will probably only win 50+% of the vote, right? Like, but there will be a weariness of what we've been through that if there's a real concerted effort to rebuild, doing the sort of all the components I mentioned 5 minutes ago, that something like that could hold for the rest of our lives. I don't know beyond that.
Maybe. I mean, maybe.
I mean,
We're making all sorts of rosy assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I know. I mean, but this is the thing: is that I think that it would feel less rosy. I'm sorry, the assumptions would feel more realistic, less rosy than they do if like the basics were there. If like the people who need to be acting like this is possible were acting like it, right? And the place where I'm more pessimistic than you, I think, is, or maybe we're just equally pessimistic, is that that's not happening. Like I'd written about this a few times starting like January or February about how like the fights between abundists and post neoliberals and social democrats are all whistling past the graveyard, right? Like if there's going to be a Democratic governing party in 2029, like they're going to have to focus on rudiments, right? Building some foundation on which like you can later on figure out what kind of economic system you want to build or whatever. And they're going to have to figure out like how to hire people, how to retain people, how to make them stick around, because like give them confidence that it's not just all going to disappear in 4 or 8 years. You got to do the accountability piece. And like, if that were where we were headed, I think we would feel it now. And then Sam Bagenstos, who was like a lawyer in the Obama administration and in the Biden administration at the sort of like, here's a bureaucracy lawyer basically, right? So he knows what it would take to create a system like that, and he also knows the players who are contemplating what comes next. And he's like, there is not nearly enough talk about how this is like a root and branch situation we have, and like he gets the sense that they're all making plans to just do the best with whatever they inherit from Trump. And like I find that I don't find it shocking, but I find it like a very depressing thing. And I'm glad he wrote the piece in the hope that like we can take the conversation down from the like abstractions and the luxuries of abundance versus post neoliberalism and bring them back into like how do we want to organize ourselves toward the end of saying, hey, you don't get to pulverize the government illegitimately and get away with it. So we're going to rebuild just on principle. 2, we're going to do it because we have we have like we have a vision for what like America can and should be, and we need a foundation on which to build it. When I start feeling like that is, if I ever start feeling like that is settling in among the Democratic elite class, I will feel like, okay, like we are moving in the direction of something that might actually stick. Um, I don't want to leave anyone watching with the impression that I think, oh, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, simple, right? Rebuild a whole bureaucracy, simple. Like that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that if everyone was rowing in that direction, these are Super Bowl challenges, and like in a way, the things that it would take to get there. Like you need to unshackle yourself from the filibuster. You need to unshackle yourself from a partisan Supreme Court if you're going to make any of this stuff work. And having decided we're going to unshackle ourselves, you could have a much more dynamic, like leading party doing the rebuilding in a way that, who knows? It could, like you don't have to abandon all hope at this juncture, even though it seems bleak. And anyway, that as I was like reading the piece that you wrote and then listening to you talk about it, that's just like the thing I want to get out there for you guys, for everyone, because it's like I get yelled at for criticizing Democrats more than Republicans, but it's like in this like go in this direction, like we will feel like we're all working toward the same goal if you fight a little harder and show a little more awareness of like the reality you're set to inherit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think it's more optimistic than I'm at. I mean, for instance, like you're talking about like doing better policies and stuff. And I think like, I don't know, like, does that matter if you don't reform the Supreme Court? Does it matter if you don't like add a couple Senate seats and stuff? Like you have to make fundamental systemic changes.
Yeah.
That I think are really hard to make.
I think I have
it's just very, very hard to do.
Okay, so I think this has almost nothing to do with policy.
Right.
Like policy, the way I think that the abundance people have policy ideas, and the anti-monopoly post-neoliberal, they have policy ideas, and they're really fixated on them without realizing that there's can be no basis for implementing. Right? Okay. What I'm like, I mean, will to do things like add states, but also an affect, right? Like, okay, here's something that I think is very possible, if not likely to happen, is that over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, like a bunch of the things that Trump has done, like the Supreme Court will find them to have been illegal, right? And so they'll say, hollowing out the Department of Education, that was not cool. And then so the New York Times and the Washington Post, they'll all like talk about how our institutions are holding.
Oh, they held.
Yeah,
Brian, everything's cool, bro.
But the practical effect, right? Practically speaking, there will be like no remedy for the people who are fired, right? The practical effect will be a precedent saying that presidents can't actually hire and fire with abandon, starting now, right?
Right. That's how it works.
And the effect, if not the intent, will be to force the next Democratic president to just make do with this government suffused with Trump cronies, right? And what I'm talking about is not necessarily Democrats going out on the hustings and saying we're going to pack the Supreme Court, irrespective of whether that's a winning political argument, but saying we're not going to tolerate that. Like there's going to be a reckoning for the theft of the court. There's going to be a reckoning for the things the court let Trump get away with and then try to Calvin ball us, right? Like we have the Democratic Party is filled with really distinguished lawyers, and we can read your briefs and we can see where they conflict. And we can see when you move with dispatch, and we can see when you drag your heels for convenient ends. And we are simply not going to abide by a different set of rules. Like we insist on it. And then maybe they do a switch in time that saves 9, or maybe you just pass a bill packing the court. But if Democrats were going to be understand that they needed to do something like that, I think we'd already see them test driving different ways to get that across to the justices and to honestly to the law firms, to the businesses that are caving to Trump. It's like we are watching, we are taking names. There's going to be a new sheriff in town at some point, and you see Elizabeth Warren wrote a good letter to Sherry Redstone about bribing Trump, and you saw a handful
Yeah,
of
that was good. I like that.
yeah, but it could have been 46, 7 Senate Democrats instead of
Right.
3, right?
Right.
When Tom Cotton wanted to subvert the Iran nuclear deal, he got all 47 Republican senators to write a letter to the Ayatollah, I guess, saying, "Hey, there's going to be a Republican president at some point. We're just going to rip up the agreement. You should know that going into your negotiations with the Obama administration." And like Obama pulled off the JCPOA. Turns out Tom Cotton it wasn't an idle threat. Trump did rip it up. But like it caught people's attention. It let you know that they were serious because he got everyone in the party to sign on. And when there are like, it's like a quarter or less of the House Democratic Caucus and the Senate Democratic Caucus that see things the way you and I do. And they're the ones who sign their names to these letters that don't have any intimidating effect. Because they're like, well, on the one hand, it's Donald Trump and the whole Republican Party threatening us. And on the other hand, it's Elizabeth Warren and Ron Wyden. Like, who are we actually, who are we going to bend to? And so, like my whole project at this point, I feel like is trying to get Democrats to act more like Tom Cotton did when he wanted to get something, when he wanted to have an impact. And like, if we can get that done, then I feel like we'll at least start to feel like a little less pessimistic about everything all the time, because like there will be capable, energetic people with power at our back and like kind of like doing what seems to make sense given how big of the emergency is. I like it's this. Like I just see like like a pinpoint of light at the end of the tunnel, and I feel like if you could just get a little bit more of what I'm talking about, it would widen a little bit, right? And then we could keep moving forward, and it might widen a little more. Anyway, that's like I don't think that like the like we'd be incapable in theory of rebuilding a like viable liberal democratic state.
Okay.
But my pessimism stems from basically from personnel, I guess.
Yeah, and mine stems from people and human nature. I'm again, the base assumption in this is that you get like an overwhelming rejection of the world we live in, and I think that a reasonably large percentage of the people like this. They voted for it. They want this, and it's not a majority. It's not a plurality, but it's enough. It's enough to make liberalism untenable.
Do you think that is that? So if you think, let's just put a number on it, 35%. Maybe you quibble with
Sure.
it, but like as Trump tests hotter and hotter, right? He takes an inch, takes a mile. Now he's murdering people in the Caribbean. Do you think that group of people grows or shrinks or just intensifies at that level as they see that when you really go down this road, it's not just owning the libs. It is wars. It is murder. Because I do think that there are sadists, tens of millions of sadists in the United States who you'll never get to admit that this is like there's anything wrong with what's happening. But do you think that the 35% who you like I know one thing from your newsletters is like you like to find the Republicans who voted for Trump, but now he's not funding their emergency,
Right. Yeah.
And instead of being like we got it wrong, they're like, but we voted for you, right? Do you think that those people are permanently in the 35%, or that as the atrocities pile up, they'll be like, oh, okay, maybe this is more than we bargained for?
So this is the $40,000 question, and I don't know the answer to it. And this is another human nature question, right? And you see this in like every time authoritarianism blossoms, different societies react differently to it, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times it picks up steam because it's like the Osama bin Laden, the weak horse and the strong horse, right? I mean, people who were indifferent to it, once they see the way that it's ascendant, some people are going to be repelled by it, but some people are going to be like, I don't know. It's like it's the only game in town. Got to get on. And so I don't know what the net effect is. I have no. Do you have thoughts on that? How do you think that plays out?
So I think it goes down, but I don't think it goes down enough. Well, no, I think it could go down to more or less where things were when George W. Bush left office. Because I remember the hothouse environment post 9/11, and George Bush wasn't trying to turn America fascist, but there was a lot of bloodlust in the country, and he did channel it, and to great effect for years. And then things started dragging him down, right? And this reminds me of a very famous blog post from the Netroots era, the early Netroots eras. I will have to find this and I can send it to you, but it was like a colloquy between two progressives, and one asked the other, like, what do you think is the floor on George W. Bush's approval rating? And the guy said 28%. And it was like, that's a very specific number. How did you arrive at that? And he said there was just a Senate election in Illinois. And at the time, Illinois was like Peoria was like the median state, right? Like it looked a lot like America. And it was between Barack Obama and Alan Keyes. Both black men.
And Keyes got 28.
And he's like, look, the race factor is neutralized because both candidates are black. Barack Obama is about as polished and capable as you could ask a senator to be. Keyes is about as kooky and unfit for office as you can imagine a candidate to be. And Keyes still got 28%.
Yeah.
Fast forward like 2.5 years, that's exactly where George W. Bush leaves office at. And like maybe that number has floated up a little bit in the almost 20 years since then. But I think it's lower than 44 or whatever Trump's approval rating is now. And I think that there's a zone below 40 where you'll get some like vestigial people who are like, well, I don't like, I think Trump has taken some wrong terms, but I'm still a Republican. Like they'll probably vote Republican, but they probably like would prefer it if Republicans like move back towards, people who had any interest in public service. And I mean, I have to be honest with myself every time I write. And when I like do podcasts and talk like this, like a fair number of the ideas that we're talking about, like from my perspective, they're at least partially rooted in like imagining what would make me feel more galvanized, right? Like more confident that there's like future democratic life in the country. And then like maybe constructing ways for Democrats to talk about things and whatever that are cognizant of their political calculuses. And so I realized that like that approach is sort of rooted in projection or like gut instinct as much as like empiricism. But I feel like at the same time, there's value if only in like allowing for more variance. I try more things. Maybe some things will work better than the approach we've tried for the last decade. But the other part is that like I don't think that like what's the best way to prevent fascism from taking root permanently is like fundamentally an empirical one. Like it isn't really a thing for quants to answer for us.
I would agree with that.
Like how do you get Donald Trump's approval rating down? Well, we're going to focus group this and we're going to do that, and this is the message that does best in the lab. It's like throwing haymakers a lot, and like it could be the murder of 11 boat people in the Caribbean. It could be Epstein. It could be a combination of a bunch of things. It could be one of these city invasions turns into a like Tiananmen type thing. Who knows? Like it is a infinitely complicated, complex world. Like that is much more like nature, complex, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit too pat to say Trump's been stable at 40 to 45% for forever. And so that's the permanent condition. I don't think that. And I also think trying as like almost like as a team to yank him down is something that just gets more people invested in like rowing forward.
Yeah.
And then it feels like better. And then we're all like a little more confident that we can get there.
Well, and I'll give you my optimistic take.
Yeah.
If you want it.
Yeah, I do.
Because we've been here for a while.
Look, like your colleagues are going to say, Brian managed to get the optimistic side.
The other possibility is that this all just goes away on its own. So there's a good book, The Age of Acrimony, about the period, I think it's like 1890 to 1910, 1915. That like American politics was incredibly ugly. And and then it just stopped. People moved on. There were other things. And this, when you look through American history, there's a lot of this, like tensions that don't get resolved. They just get buried. And yeah, I don't know. I think back to the 70s, right? 70s were a really bad time in American life. Economic shocks, social problems, rampant crime, still dealing with legacy of Jim Crow. I mean, all these things. You have Vietnam, incredibly unpopular war. And then like by 1990, that's all just kind of gone. And it's, it's not really gone because it's all underneath the surface. But, like sometimes things, not always, but sometimes they just get plowed under. And maybe that could happen here, right? Why not? Especially since this whole thing that has happened in America, there isn't a reason for it. There is no reason that America decided to turn fascist, right? It isn't like, well, we had just undergone the First World War and an entire generation of young men was dead, or we'd undergone insane inflation. And like, we've been living through insane levels of peace and prosperity. This is just, it's basically out of nowhere. There is no causal effect where you could say, oh, yes, the American people, I can understand why they all of a sudden wanted totalitarianism. Like, and so if there's no real cause for it to happen, maybe there won't be really a cause for it going away.
Can I suggest a mechanism by which that might happen that I
Sure.
think is it like ratchets down the optimism of the scenario a bit? Is that, well, so first, like the country wasn't as polarized in the 70s as it is now, and so
Sure.
for people to just be like pause, restart, like they didn't have to go sort themselves in any kind of way. They could stay where they were. I think we came out of it in the 90s just kind of like, oh, like we've turned the page from that because Republicans won 3 consecutive elections and Bill Clinton came in and was like, we're just going to make do with what we got, right? What we inherit from Reagan and Bush is what we'll work with. And he governed in that way. And, there are a lot of people who have like Rooseveltian ambition for the country who think that was a lost opportunity to try to rebuild. And that if we get to whether it's 2029 or 2033 or whatever, and everyone's just exhausted by this and they're like, let's just move on from it. I agree it could happen. But that means that the losses that we're talking about are we just kind of accept them. And then so the liberal state is Social Security, Medicare, whatever's left of Medicaid. You don't have the best scientific research in the world, and there's no basis to rebuild it on. You know what I mean? And we just kind of decide we'll be a democracy. We're just going to be a small, mediocre one. And like,
I'll take it.
I would take.
Where do I sign up? That sounds great, Brian.
Like if I wake up and I'm 50, 55, and that's like the country I have to spend out the last 20, 30 years of my life in, you're right. I'll take that over, the worst case scenarios. But like, I think that as an immediate ask to try to avoid that scenario, like you wrote something recently where I was like, yes, right on. It was about, it was after the Minnesota mass shooting. And you were like, why aren't Democrats like saying, okay, if Kash Patel is calling this a terrorist attack.
That fucking tweet of his doing pull-ups. Like,
and
shouldn't every Democrat have just like been running with that? All like, oh, you're doing pull-ups 4 days before a mass shooting when this guy left a trailer? Yes,
also,
sorry.
Republicans can't do pull-ups. None of them. But yes, it was like, but you're like, why aren't all Democrats saying, yeah, you took your eye off the ball to focus on political vendettas and pull-ups, and you let a terrorist attack happen. You need to be fired, right? And I totally agree. That would have been a great thing for Democrats to latch on to. And it's like, what I really want is less Democrats to take every piece of advice I offer them or you might offer them or whatever and run with it. But just for me to have some faith that they're thinking along those lines and that they will choose some battles, right? Like just being willing to say, like, we're taking names. We are not gonna accept this lying down. And the Pritzker comes close. Pritzker says things along these lines, but you need, I think, to get people believing that like we will come out of this okay, and not just like we'll accept 12 years of eating shit and then make do with what we have. Like, you need more than that. And it's just like the one thing that I feel like I can do with my efforts is try to get it from like 3 senators signing onto the letter to 10 to 20, and maybe eventually, before it's too late, you have a whole party being like, okay, we're ready to rumble. Not there yet, though.
Yeah. And part of that is, I mean, there is a fairly significant, I don't know how big it is, but a fairly significant contingent of Dems who really don't think that Trump is different, who just think like, nah, this is the same. This is, this was George W. Bush. This was H.W. Bush. This was Nixon. This was Reagan. And I sort of, I basically reject that while accepting that the forces propelling Trump have been there for a very long time.
Yes. Oh, I can.
Right. Like we could do 5 hours on this, but right. The forces which propelled Trump, I think, go back to like the founding.
Oh yeah.
But I just really reject the idea that he is a straight line fulfillment of everything from like 1946 Republicanism. And I say this not as a fan of the Republican Party, now a member, like I have no defensiveness about this, but it seems highly contingent, like what has happened to the Republican Party under Trump, and Trump himself seems to be a category difference in terms of his hostility to liberalism.
Yeah.
Again, small L liberalism, which has just never existed in America. It didn't even exist under Nixon.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, we've in like the liberal half of letters or whatever, we like I just like is he the natural endpoint, or is he a break, right? Like, and it's kind of both. I think it's obviously kind of both. I do think that the breathtaking abuse of power in term 2 is disabusing people, particularly like on the left, of the idea that this is just the same as Bushism or Reaganism. And then there are Democrats like Jared Golden who know that Trump is different, but feel scared to say so because their districts are pro-Trump. I don't think he believes it when he says, I don't think, Trump is a threat to democracy. So I think that the percentage of people who are part of the Democratic coalition who realize this is a different beast is growing. It's large enough now that the party can just ride a consensus that this is different.
I would hope so, man. I mean, I remember Freddie DeBoer, who I always find Freddie to be an interesting guy.
Me too. He's a good critic.
Sometime between the election and the inauguration, he did a sort of everybody calm down post about Trump. And he's like, it's not going to be terrible. Like, they'll do some bad things about unions, And I just remember thinking, what fucking planet are you living on, dude? And again, I don't know Freddie at all. This is, I'm telling you this like it's a conversation. It's not. I don't know him. I just read him. And but that was like, to me, that was the perfect distillation of like the progressive blindness to how Trump is different.
Yeah.
It's like he might wind up appointing some FTC chairs that we are going to have to unwind. I was like, dude, we should be so lucky.
Yeah.
We're going to have troops in the streets. And he was just incapable of seeing it anything other than like, this is big business. This isn't like, that's not, it is that. But it's that with a category difference on top of it,
I wonder if he'd reassess now. I know like people invested in the is he fascist debate are kind of slinking away from their like long held view that he's basically no different than any other conservative going back to, Michael Oakeshott. But I remember just covering the news in the 2010s. And watching the way Republicans operated on Capitol Hill and in elections versus Democrats. And I remember when, Democrats spent the 2012 primary talking about the math of Mitt Romney's tax plan. And then Barack Obama and Mitt Romney get to the debate stage, and Obama's got his math-based attacks ready to go, and they're like solid. They are based on solid analysis from like nonpartisan actors. And Mitt Romney's like, "That's not my tax plan." Yeah, like, and Obama had nothing to worry. He lost that debate. He obviously did fine in the election, but it's like, if you can just do that, if you can just say nope, not true, um, and like at some point I began disabusing myself of the notion that they're in an information bubble. They really believe in trickle down economics. That when they say tax cuts raise revenue, that's just they're making an analytical error and not saying something they know to be false. So I was like, no, they get it. They know it's not true, and they're saying it anyway. And this is like a alarming basis for Democratic small d politics.
Yeah.
And I did not predict based on that they would then nominate and elect Trump, but I did know that Trump was going to win the nomination in September of 2015. Like, it was clear to me then. I remember having like an exchange with, it was Brendan Buck, who was then working in John Boehner's office, about like, you guys are like making any kind of good faith legislating impossible with like the people you're allowing power in the party and so on. And I pointed to this guy, Chris McDaniel, who was running in Mississippi as like a far right person, and he didn't win the nomination in the end. But Brendan's response was basically like, so one guy in Mississippi who can't win, like, no, we got this. We're in control of the party, and we're not going to let that contingent take over. And I'm like, I think you are going to.
Yeah.
And
I want to do the Bane voice. Do you feel in control?
and so like when Trump took over the GOP, and it gave rise to these questions: is he sui generis, or is he a logical endpoint of conservatism? I was like, it's both things. If the past 30 years hadn't happened, there wouldn't be Trump, but maybe Trump was the only kind of figure who could do it in one fell swoop. Like, take the Chris McDaniels who couldn't win the primaries and make them the center of power in Republican politics. And I think that's kind of what happened.
So I'm going to have to jump in a couple, but I would say I'll just sort of leave this as a thing for people to think through. Obviously, I've written about this specific question a lot over the last decade.
Yeah.
And I had a reader reach out to me with sort of a synthesis theory on this, which is that Trump is not the natural extension of like the last 40 years of American conservatism. But the last 40 years of American conservatism were a striking deviation from the norm. And Trump is a regression to that norm, which is like the pre-Jim Crow, and this becomes difficult because you have to disentangle Republican from conservatism, right? You have to, because these things have all moved around and changed. And, you go back to the 60s and the Republicans are a much more liberal party. The people who are segregationists tend to be Democrats, right? Like so you have to take the partisan stuff off of it and think much more in the theological sense. But when you start going back, like conservatism in America looks a lot more like Charles Lindbergh traditionally than Ronald Reagan, and Trump represents a return to that from basically the holiday of conservatism that existed from like Bill Buckley when he starts banishing the Birchers through George W. Bush. Anyway, I don't know if this is right or not, but I found it to be a fascinating frame for thinking about this question. And so I wanted to give it to you guys.
Yeah, it's a good one. If you have 1 minute for me to...
Yeah, please. I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah. Oh, no, I mean, I think that's like a really good synthesis. It's, I think that given that like it confines itself to American history, then if you really just winding the clock back, you say that Trump is sort of the reemergence of the antebellum South, but with Republican in front of its name instead of Democrat. And I think that there's more like Lindberghian fascism or whatever you want to call it mixed in to what we're living through now than what existed in the South then, which was from that, slavery and that historical period. But that there is a sense in which he's running that Lee Atwater um, uh, timeline in reverse, where Atwater gave this interview where he's like, you start out by saying N word, N word, N word, and then that becomes unpopular, and so you start talking about busing. And then, that becomes, not great ground. So you start talking about taxes and all these things. But the key is that they hurt Black people more than they hurt white people. And this is like the Rosetta Stone for a lot of people like me who were trying to figure out what the Republican Party is over the last decade or two. And we're not all the way back to N word, N word, N word. But Trump is successfully pulling the conservative movement toward where they're more comfortable saying the things that they've wanted to say for 40 or 50 years that have been continually suppressed by liberal cultural dominance. And I think that there is like a huge wellspring of gratitude for him among movement conservatives for making them free to act like assholes, basically. And the question for me is like, just how far back can he roll the wheel of time, and how many people decide, yep, this is things getting better as he does it. And I still feel like moving the direction that he's moving, like you're going to have a lot of bad people who have a lot of guns who are like really militantly pro-Trump, but it's going to be a shrinking pool of people.
From your lips to God's ears.
This was fun.
Thanks
we can
for
do it
having me
again.
on, man. Very, very kind of you. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, friends.